And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities. Well, maybe three. Either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. Hello and welcome. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 68, Wednesday, April the 9th, 2025. My name is Jason Olborn, and I am here to deliver you news, comment, debate, argument, and get you riled up or get you laughing out of your chair. And here is my co-host who's going to do even more. Her name, Nicola Charles.
Happy hump day, everyone. It's the middle of the week. Oh, at least we're halfway to the weekend, Jason. And I just want to thank the listeners for again sending in all their comments. My life right now is, by the way, it's feeling easier doing the show with the clocks change. And I'm not normally a fan of daylight saving, but thank you for that. And I don't get to read the comments until way at the end of the day. So there's pages and pages of them. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. And yeah, it's very important that you send that in. And not yet has anyone been brave enough to send a voice clip to air on the show, but you're always open to do that. You can send a short voice clip, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, no longer in length, and send it to the dailyaustralian@gmail.com and we'll air it. You don't need to identify yourself. You don't need to do that in any way. It can be anonymous, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, look, that's a great idea. Now, just quickly, I had a beautiful opportunity yesterday to speak to Lionel Nation, media pundit, and just on that, he started his media career literally by being a serial phone caller to talkback radio, and he would often put on character voices to get on and on and on, and then finally he got discovered. Now, what's interesting about that, I don't know if you've ever seen it, the movie Talk Radio. It's an Oliver Stone film starring Eric Bogosian. I think it's around about maybe the late 80s, and it's all about a right-wing shock jock. And the fellow, this Eric Bogosian actor, the character, he starts off as a suit salesman, and he's just got this beautiful resonant deep voice, and he's got these opinions, and some radio guy comes into his shop one day and he's so impressed he offers him a job to be on the radio, and that's how he gets started. But this is the thing about media, why we see in mainstream it's this weird attraction to sports stars or get radio shows and commentary gigs, but they're kind of limited in what they know because it's all about, sport, etc. Ray Hadley, Australia's probably most successful talkback host, if you will, based on ratings and income, etc. He was an auctioneer when he got started. He was a taxi driver. So
well, who's that politician? I think he's a leader of a party that we spoke to. And I said to him on air, "Oh my goodness, you have an amazing radio voice." Who was that recently that we spoke to? I think he was the leader of the Libertarians in New South Wales. But
of course, John Ruddock. Oh, there you go. Yeah, John's got a very distinct speaking voice.
Yeah. My husband used to do the same thing. My husband, Nick, he's running for the Senate. I'm about to interview him on my podcast at the weekend. Husband and wife interview. That'll be interesting. But he used to do the same thing. He was just a guy, a manager in construction industry. And he used to ring into 3AW a lot. And he used to speak to all of the guys on prime time. And they knew him. And he was on an OK list. So every time he rang in, within the minute, they'd be on air and they'd say, "Hey, Nick, what's your opinion?" And he used to say things like, "Oh, I'm really worried about, the legalization of marijuana. What's it going to do to the roads? Am I going to be driving next to people who are stoned out of their brain?" And, he was basically just an aggrieved Aussie, right, ringing in constantly. And then during the pandemic, he got delisted because he actually got on air and he said, "I think the whole thing's a scam. I don't think there's a pandemic and I don't think people should take these injections." That was it, Jason. He never got through again.
Oh, my goodness me. Isn't it amazing how everything is filtered like that?
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, there are trolls, right? And there are serial pests and there are people that, want to do that to a point. And so, you get to a stage on social media where you've got to go through the process that you either ignore or you block. And it just gets to a point that it's just ridiculous. And if someone's sabotaging your work, you can only tolerate it so much. But the thing is, I guess it's the imbalance there. It's one thing to say something that people disagree with, and that's, debate and conversation. Again, to quote Lionel in the conversation, he said to me, this whole idea about free speech. He said, first of all, hate speech, is it hate or is it speech? And he went into detail about that. And that's an interesting perspective. And then he said, I've got this thing. He says, so what? You see something, I don't like it. So what? He says, you're allowed to say it. And he goes into detail again. So what if you say something? You don't have to listen. Turn it off.
People have got to get thicker skins, Jason. For a while there, I tried going a bit blonder with my hair, and I've gone back to being a brunette now. But because I look a bit blonder in our radio pic, someone comes after me constantly when we post the show on X, and all he says is, "Who the hell is this dumb blonde?" And I think, so funny, I'm not a blonde. Thank you. That's a big compliment to my hairdresser. But yes, some people just get on there because they just want to bring you down, and they just want to have a fight, and they want to set two online. I almost think like a lot of guys who are kind of domestic bullies, or they like a bit of back and forth at home, a bit of arguing. The wife's probably getting a break since the advent of social media, because same on Facebook, same on X, a lot of these people just get online to have a fight, and they have a real set to, and they get really nasty and they get really personal, and it just muddies the water, and it takes away from the actual, crux of what people are talking about. And it's horrible to watch. But I mean, you can mute these people, you can block these people. You have to get a thicker skin in society. And like I said, the guys I work with, the way they talk to each other, if you just wrote down in a script the things that they say to each other, I'm sure they'd all be in jail. But in actual fact, it's friendly banter. So of course they've sent us down this road that we all get offended by everything, but I don't get offended by that much. You can walk away from trolls. Don't feed them.
Yeah, that's an important point too, and it's a lesson to be learnt. You're not going to be able to change the minds of certain people, and so sometimes you're just better off to walk away from it. But at the same time, if you can encourage debate, and the exchange of ideas, then that's the purpose of what we are trying to do. And at the end of the day, all of us want to lead happy lives, productive lives, successful lives, and we do so for ourselves, for our family, and our loved ones. And I think that when we realise that the true enemy is those that choose or seek to divide us, the revolution will be won and the Homo sapien will survive. We all are friends. We all have more in common than we don't.
Totally.
And so this is the great point. It's humanity that will win the revolution, and the dependence, which is what we know that is being pushed upon us, is something that we don't want. We only want to be self-sufficient. That's why we go to school in the first place. We don't go there to learn how to be dependent on a system. If we need that,
school doesn't do that though. When you get in the trenches, as we are on the front line, when you put your head above the parapet, there's a target on your back. And people who speak out or make an effort to sort of assist other people to speak out and, interview people as you do and I do, it does put a target on your back. And that's why people say, you're brave doing the radio show and you're brave telling the truth, or at least discussing your truth. And you know what's great? Sometimes I've been on here with you and you've changed my mind about something. I'd like to think that I've possibly done that with you as well. And I know that we've done that with the listeners. And I think that's a good thing, because you switch on any other radio station in this country, Australia, and they will be talking about all the great things that these awful politicians who've really destroyed the quality of life in Australia are doing because they're paid to compliment them, or they're talking about reality television. And right now, with everything that's going on, I don't have time. Well, I don't watch it for a start, but I don't have time to talk about reality television and the people that are scripted into it. And so I think it's good that we at least attempt these conversations. Jason, should we get to those news headlines? Because I think there's a lot today.
Look, there is a ton of news, and something I'm just going to before I even get to it, I've just picked it up here. Elon Musk has said that those who finance the attacks against Tesla will go to prison. And this is just a rumor, so I'm not putting it into the bulletin. But the reports are now saying that Pam Bondi may be launching an investigation into George and Alex Soros for allegedly financing attacks on Tesla property.
Oh my goodness, really?
So that's a big statement, but it hasn't made the bulletin as such because I've just seen it and I haven't verified it. But just to give everyone sort of an idea of where we're going. And before we do get into the bulletin, I also want to just point out that when we do construct this, or when I construct this in the morning, and we're up early each day, I'm up at 4:30 in the morning collecting news headlines that we get in from overseas, etc. And the idea is to be able to, one, verify, two, to be able to draw it from some mainstream component. So therefore, it doesn't have to come from the same source, but at least it's got to come from an area that it has met a criteria or a standard. And if there is something that we can get directly from primary material, that's even better. But when you're pulling stuff from overseas to bring you up and get the earliest possible news, this is the way that we're being able to establish a solid bulletin, generally 6 to 10 minutes long, which is much more than you're going to get on any other radio station, except maybe the ABC, and you won't get any of the stories that we cover here. So we are building a show unlike anything else, as you've explained, but at a level of quality that can compete with anyone anywhere in the world. So I hope you enjoy. So let's get into it right now. The Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, is reportedly under Australian Federal Police investigation for a seemingly innocuous crime of having disappearing messages on her WhatsApp phone. Avi Yemeni made the startling revelation after reaching out to the American-born bureaucrat for an interview and noticing the messages had been wiped 24 hours later. He reported it to the federal police and was at first brushed off, although he was contacted later and asked to provide evidence. Government authorities must preserve records for purposes such as audits. There are calls now for the self-appointed censor of all things online to resign or to be stood down. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been crowned the winner of the first election debate. Would you believe that? If you lose to Anthony Albanese in a debate, you're probably going to lose the election. Dutton and Albo traded barbs while answering questions from 100 undecided voters at the Sky News Daily Telegraph People's Forum on Tuesday night. Albo was awarded 44 out of 100 votes, Dutton 35, and 21 of the voters were still undecided on who they would vote for. Well, you would think that would be at least that, because there is a rise in third-party votes. The debate was marred by news that Peter Dutton's father had reportedly suffered a heart attack. He was taken to hospital and as of 9 p.m. was in a stable condition. Dutton has also released details of his bold energy plan that would drive down gas bills for residential customers by an estimated 7%. The release of the highly anticipated modelling, so we all know how good modelling is from Frontier Economics, comes after the opposition leader has faced nearly daily grilling over the impact of the gas policy on household bills. A gas user with an average quarterly bill of $200 would say $14 a quarter, or a massive $56 a year. Don't spend it all at once, while industrial customers will pay 15% less on gas. Residential electricity prices are presumed to drop by 3%. Now, we'll talk about all of this paltriness in the main part of the show. Meanwhile, over in the US, Trump tariffs have, in a stroke of a pen, gutted inflation. Oil's down 20%, our dollar down 7%. Interest rates are set to fall down 0.5%, with 3 further cuts before Christmas. Deutsche Bank says the RBA will follow the script from previous crises and deliver a double rate cut when it next meets in May, as Trump's threats of even higher tariffs on China added to fears of a looming global trade war. So if you have a fairly secure job and do not export goods to the United States, you are way better off already. And with the price of goods going up in the US, it means overseas goods will look to other markets to dump their goods. So imports will actually become cheaper here, despite the small reduction in the value of our dollar. The new Liberal candidate for Whitlam claimed a Marxist brainwashing happening at Australian schools. Nathaniel Smith, previously a New South Wales State MP, is a member of the party's religious conservative faction. He replaced soldier Ben Britton, who was disendorsed for comments misconstrued as sexist about the attrition of women in combat roles in the military. Grassroots Labor members are ramping up internal pressure on the government over its positions on the Middle East and AUKUS, urging Anthony Albanese to make 2 major foreign policy shifts if he wins a second term. Labor Friends of Palestine is making a fresh call for a re-elected Albanese government to impose sanctions on Israel. while the Labor Against War group wants it to sink the agreement to equip Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. But the government is standing firm on both fronts, exposing a divide between sections of the Labor membership and the federal parliamentary wing. A former New South Wales policewoman has claimed she was bullied out of a job after blowing the whistle on allegations that cops were sharing offensive pictures of dead women. Ex-senior constable Michelle Carlin claims former workers shared dozens of unauthorised photos of dead people on social media apps as part of a sick game. The 10-year police veteran alleges officers would pass around photographs of dead women's genitals, rated their racks, their breasts on Snapchat, as well as a series of other demeaning photographs. The White House says 104% additional tariffs on China go into effect at midnight tonight because China has not removed their 34% tariff on the US. China has accused Washington of blackmail and said it will fight to the end after Trump threatened to impose those additional tariffs. At the same time, President Xi is seeking to present himself as a responsible champion of the international trading system and defender of globalization against the Trump wrecking ball. There's the G word, people. Neither position bears scrutiny. The latter is almost laughable since it's Beijing's persistent disregard of international rules that has fueled the anger in America in the first place. As part of its strategy, the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to downplay the impact of its super economy, as the People's Daily described it at the weekend, insisting the country is strong and resilient. Meanwhile, Italian PM Giorgia Meloni is meeting with Trump next week to discuss a tariff deal. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called out the media hysteria about the tariffs. She said, despite fear-mongering by the media, the world is clearly responding to President Trump's approach. The White House says America does not need other countries as much as they need us. El Salvador President Bukele will be meeting with President Trump at the White House on April the 14th. They'll discuss El Salvador's partnership on housing, Tren de Aragua, and MS-13 gang members in the US. Meanwhile, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has introduced a new task force called the Directors Initiative Group, aimed at enhancing transparency and restoring confidence in the intelligence community. This includes tackling inefficient spending, improving operational efficiency, pinpointing documents for potential declassification, such as those tied to Crossfire Hurricane, Biden's alleged censorship efforts, and files concerning the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK. RFK Jr. is copping a hiding from supposed MAGA supporters for his current position on MMR and the measles outbreak in Texas, where 2 children reported to have died from measles. And a new landmark study supported by 341 references proves COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis is more common and more lethal than myocarditis caused by SARS-CoV-2 infection, decisively debunking misconceptions promoted by public health authorities. The death toll in a Caribbean island after the roof fell off in a nightclub during a performance has reached 44 at the Jet Set nightclub in the Dominican Republic as it collapsed on Tuesday morning. Local media said there was between 500 and 1,000 people in the club when disaster struck, and a Californian man pleaded guilty on Tuesday to trying to kill Brett Kavanaugh at the US Supreme Court's justice in a suburb of Washington, D.C. nearly 3 years ago. He faces 30 years behind bars. And Lionel Nation, US media pundit and lawyer, says artificial general intelligence is the greatest threat to humanity, that we do not understand it, that the law always trails technology, and we do not know what crimes of the future will be. Nicola.
The law always trails technology. This is something I talk about all the time. And actually this weekend on my podcast, I'll be interviewing a gentleman who is specializes in looking at the dangers of artificial intelligence and how that links in with our digital ID, because essentially we're going to get a new master, and the new master is not going to be human. And so when you're looking for accountability with anything that happens with your digital self, which is not your true self, they're creating in essence a new straw man movement. So a lot of people are into this straw man idea, and it is true that all of your bills and all of your debt, you'll see your name written in capitals, and it's actually not you. And your straw man is actually created days and days after your original birth date. My husband's actually proved that for himself. And what we're going to have is a new digital straw man, which will eventuate at some point when people eventually comply between 2025 and 2030, which will be interesting for those of us who are sort of middle-aged at the time that comes along. But you don't have to create a digital straw man. That will be entirely your choice. So, yeah, there's lots of things legally. There's no protections in place. That's a concern. And love him or hate him, Elon Musk a long time ago warned about the dangers of this. And it's really irresponsible that our governments, it's like that saying, gosh, what's that well-known saying, that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I think we're moving ahead. I think they've been convinced by the likes of Bill Gates and no doubt George Soros that they have this new control management system, this new AI governance. You've got Tony Blair is obsessed with it. And if you watch him talk about digital identity and data with the sound off, and he does this motion with his hands like he's got someone around the neck, it's awful. And his eyes become absolutely wild. You cannot order people to create a digital straw man. And I think this is going to be the downfall of the New World Order, because people are going to resist this at every level. I've been threatened just this week with the closure of a bank account I've had with Westpac since 2012 because they need additional documentation for ID. I've provided them with birth certificates, marriage certificates, visas, passports, driver's licenses, work contracts, and proof of address. I don't have any other additional ID to show you. And no, I won't be getting a digital ID. So that's the end of me and Westpac. I've been locked out of my Bendigo Bank app because I won't approve an agreement which has blocked me going into it, where I agree for them to go into all of my applications on my smartphone that I've paid for, that I pay the bills on. The answer's no. And apparently I'm getting a phone call from Bendigo this week. I just got a notification this morning that my original Nicola Charles email account has been hacked online, that it's had its passports hacked online. And Google sent me this. I've just shared it on X. They said some of your safe passwords have now been found in a data breach from a site or an app that you use, and it's online. Please change your passwords. And I wrote, this is just an email account. Imagine living this day in and day out with a digital ID, requiring ever greater steps to secure it. Biometric steps. It's like a zero-sum game, Jason. They're going to back us into this digital straw man scenario, and they're going to say it's been hacked, it's not secure, it's in danger, there's a breach, your privacy is, at risk. What we need is an iris scan. What we need is your blood type, your fingerprint. And what this is, it's the criminalization of all peoples without a warrant. Normally it would require a warrant to take someone's fingerprints, to take their DNA. Even these, when they pull you over on the road and they do cheek swabs for tongue scrapes for drugs and even breath tests, by the letter of the law, the Constitution, all of that stuff is unlawful, and you do have a right to refuse. But this other stuff, Jason, is being brought in as convenience. We all know how good convenience food was for us, and it's not convenient, and it's dangerous, and it's being proved to me on a daily basis now that it's dangerous. So why on earth would anyone want to do it, Jason?
That is a near perfect editorial. There's nothing to fault there. I can only add a few comments that you're exactly right. The government is literally using the playbook of guilty before innocent. And it's obviously leading down the pathway to say, well, these temporary digital glitches or whatever means that we have to double down. In other words, it's leading to the microchip under the skin as the only way through. But how do you then communicate the mark of the beast over the phone to get through to the bank? It's ridiculous. So it's never going to work. And yet this is exactly what they're going to do. But at every level, at every single level, this thing must fail. And it's like, instead of saying, okay, well, we've got to go back to the drawing board and take some time out to rethink this, they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And there's seemingly no other way around it. But there is. You've just got to stop. And this is what we keep saying, just stop doing what you're doing. And take a moment to think about it. Like you said, Elon Musk, like Lionel was saying with this whole AI, he says when artificial general intelligence gets out there, and what is that? That is intelligence that you can't see. It's literally floating out there in the ether. And he says there will come a point where you'll have a doll, a toy, like you can go into a shop and make one of those dolls. He said the doll will be an inanimate object, but you'll be able to inject it with a soul, for goodness sake. And then you'll get to a point where they'll say, we don't like what you're doing to the doll. And you'll say it's an inanimate object. And he's
Oh, I
saying,
wouldn't
well,
be surprised if those things, including, robotic help in the home, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with more rights like human rights than we have. That's where we're going. It's like, oh, it must be protected, even though there's the argument that it doesn't have feelings. But, people seem to care more about their pets than they're caring about human beings right now. And I understand that. I love my pets too. But, stop giving away your rights. Stop giving away your freedom. Stop giving away your privacy. This stuff is a choice. So what I've done, look, I got sucked into the convenience of a banking app, and what I would do, because I was worried about fraud, is I would only keep like $50 in my current account and then everything else in savings. And if I wanted something during the day, literally as I was walking into a store, I would go into my app, move over $100, do a little shop, and that was that, right? Because I'm worried because I've had money stolen from credit cards in the past, like everyone else. But I can't do that anymore. It's not convenient for me anymore. Now I have to go on my laptop and go via internet banking into my account, give myself pocket money every day, just an amount of money that if I do get defrauded, it's fine. I'm not going to miss it before I leave the house. So, of course, that's very inconvenient. And this is what they're doing. They're tempting you in. They're luring you in. The digital world, particularly banking apps, you need to get them off your phone because you may have actually agreed to them going into your private stuff without realizing. These things are a honey trap. Right. This is how they're going to control you, because one day, like me, and I haven't really done anything wrong other than, of course, being the white rabbit. One day you're going to try and access your money via your banking app. And it's going to say, it is Jason. It's going to say, unfortunately, you made a comment on social media that does not align with our community standards. And therefore, you may not access your banking. You're on a 48-hour ban, a 2-week ban, a 40-day ban. It will be just like what they trialed on Facebook, and I got an 18-month ban on Facebook during the pandemic for speaking my truth and showing concern about what was going on. This is all trial stuff. They're going to bring this into your banking apps. And the thing is, I thought to myself, well, I know what I'll do. I'll just remove all the banking apps from my phone. And there was only 2. So I was just about to hit remove, and then I did some internet banking. And do you know what the buggers did? They wouldn't let me into my internet banking on my laptop unless the app, which now doesn't work and doesn't let me in on my phone, flashed up a message, is this you trying to access from a laptop? So now I've got to keep the app on my phone, right? This is my hand behind my back, right? They've got a gun to my head. I've got to keep the app on my phone to do internet banking, to say on my phone, yes, it's me. So they are backing us into a corner. They are literally highway robbers. It's their way or the highway, right? And we're going to have to push back against this because none of this is convenient. This is all to our detriment.
Just yesterday I was doing some work with a digital app that has a bunch of different services, downloading clips and editing, etc. And it keeps flashing up, update. And with your computer and your phone, you generally have to take these updates because, it fixes a bug or whatever. And this thing said fixes a bug. So I resisted it because I thought I don't really need to do it. I just want to get my job done and it's really slow and I haven't got time. And yesterday I had a few minutes and I pressed the update. And then suddenly this thing pops up and says, you need to pay $75 for a year, $120 for a certain period of time, and then a bit more for a perpetual license. And I thought, hang on a second, I paid for a perpetual license. I already paid $150 for it a couple of years ago or a year ago for this particular thing. And then I clicked on it and got this, this AI chat thing. And it came up and I asked the question, I said, but I already have a perpetual license. And it said, oh no, if you choose the update, you pay for a new perpetual license. And I thought, well, that's not a perpetual license. That's just nonsense.
Okay, so the AI is their new thief because I did this. I switched off. I never switch off my phone. I'll tell you a weird thing, Jason. Do you remember in the pandemic that Anthony Albanese went on television on the 6 o'clock news and he said, it's really important that you turn your phones off at night? I don't know if you remember that press conference. I thought it was the weirdest shit I've ever seen anyone do because I never turn my phone off at night. Now, the other day, I was running out of charge. I'd had a very busy day and I thought I need to save the charge I've got for emergencies. I was down to like 10%. So I turned off my phone, which I never do. And when I turned that phone back on, because I was nearly home and able to charge, I'd forgotten my charger, it said, "Hello, Google have installed a new AI assistant for you." And I had to go through so many pages to get rid of this AI assistant, which I had not approved, I had not asked for. These updates, again, are a lie. You've got to use the 180 rule. This isn't convenient. This isn't to get rid of bugs. They say it is, just like they told us these injections were safe and bloody effective. That's not what it is. It's so they can install more spyware without a warrant on your phone. And that's what's going on. And eventually I got rid of this AI assistant. And I got to one page and it said, well, you can choose the Google AI assistant or you can choose the Microsoft AI assistant. I'm not even on an Apple, right? And I had to go through pages to go, no, I don't want either. But my option was one or the other. You're getting an AI assistant whether you like it or not. I don't want an AI assistant. I don't want to engage with AI. I think it's funny when people ask grok questions, but that's it, right? So they're going to push this stuff on us. Why? That's our new boss. And eventually the AI you won't need to set your alarm. The AI will be buzzing your phone going, "Oh, Nicola, you got to get up for work, dude. You got a 20-minute drive to work."
Exactly.
It's going to end up being our new boss, our new policeman. I'm convinced of it. That's why they don't care that all the policemen have left the force and there's so many problems in the force. They think they've got their new AI policeman keeping an eye on us. They're listening to us, which is illegal. That's wiretapping. That's wiretapping. People are sitting in jail in America for wiretapping, and all our governments are doing it without consent, Jason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So artificial general intelligence, which will lead to the position of having law enforcement and government being run by AI. What happens when the sentient AI decides its moral standard overrules yours? So effectively, human beings are being walked into a situation through their so-called elite or leaders or whoever, who are going to hand over sovereignty to a computer system that was developed by certain means that we don't know where
We're going to be marginalized. We're going to be marginalized and oppressed in society by a friggin' Bill Gates program.
Yep. And so it's extraordinary to think that, look, if it's going to be a Bill Gates or someone else, but where those warnings are, and the most important part here is the ability to pause. We just don't have that ability to just stop. There just is this urgency. And so you start asking the questions of, well, where's the urgency coming from?
Before we work out what's going on. That's why there's the urgency before we work it out.
But who in their right mind in power? Now, when you dissect it some more, and so a lot of people, argue that they can't all be in on it. And then I argue that, there's the going along to get along mentality and joining the bandwagon and being amongst it. But at what point does a politician on $250,000 a year go home at night, sitting on an aeroplane, sitting in a car being driven around, just stop and take pause? Or is it because that they are that exhausted in the moment, they can never read through all the documents that they need to read through, and they depend on others to provide that information, that it is a slippery slope that just gets them to go downhill?
I reckon it's because AI has already been used. I think this is the Occam's razor. It's the only explanation that makes any sense to me. This is why Bill Gates was shaking the hands of Queen Elizabeth the second and, King Charles III when he was in London and people were pelting his car and shouting murderer at him because of the injections, is that they have Bill Gates. This was the same with Epstein. This is all the same stuff. AI and Bill Gates and his software and his programs and his wiretapping and listening without a warrant. He has dossiers, proper dossiers on everyone in power in the world, and he is wielding it. He's got sexual misconduct and paedophilia files via Epstein on certain individuals, and we know one of those individuals is a royal prince. He's got dossiers on all these people, but they used it on them. I believe they used it on our politicians, Jason, and we're downstream. Shit runs downhill. We're getting it after them. So what they did first is they used these dossiers to control all of politics all over the world. and now it's coming to us. And that's the only explanation that makes sense to me why any, as you say, rational politician would ever go along with some of this madness.
Well, yep, it is frightening, isn't it? When you just sit there and you wonder when it is that somebody's going to just take stock in a position of power, and yet at the same time, when you watch, or I didn't watch, I don't think I could tolerate it, but it's just hearing that Anthony Albanese defeated Peter Dutton in a debate. Just beggars belief. I mean, the man can't put a couple of sentences together or sound convincing. Can't handle questions at a press conference. But when he's spoon-fed,
he's just a script guy.
and yet, so there must have been some level of preparation for this particular debate yesterday on talking terms, and they set these debates up to say that these are all marginalised, swinging voters or marginal voters or whatever, and come up with these particular questions. But then when it comes down to it, and here we go again, Albanese says one thing, and Dutton comes back and says, we're going to save you 7% on your gas bill, $56 a year. Are you serious? $1.03 a week is your?
That's insulting.
I mean, if that's what we care about government for $1.03 a week, maybe we don't need government at all. Maybe we can govern ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's what they'll say. You don't need government. Let's just do it all with AI courts, AI judges. Yeah, they've already got AI courts in China. Did you know that? And it was interesting that you were saying, because Trump is now obviously, thanks to this 104% tariff, Trump is obviously he is in a fifth generation economic war with China. Now, the deep state was all on board with China. That's the difference between Trump and a democratic president, right? He's gone to economic war. And what did China say? That they want to be respected economically around the globe as an economic superpower. China, if you want to be respected, free the slaves. Free the slaves, because America became an economic superpower after it abolished slavery. And somehow, China, you've managed to become an economic superpower despite the fact you still enslave people because they're a different color, a different religion, or have different beliefs to you, or just because arrogantly you think you can, or perhaps because you're racist. And so, China, if you want to be respected, free the slaves.
There you go. Do you think that this is going to ever happen?
No. Why would it happen? One of the reasons they've become an economic superpower is the slaves. When you're not paying anyone and you're starving them and whipping them and beating them to make iPhones and Nike clothing, then that's why you're an economic superpower. If we weren't getting paid, the businesses we work for would do better economically as well. But unfortunately, they have to pay us. Right. So we do things the right way in the West, and they do things the wrong way in China. And for some very strange reason that I still can't fathom, we're happy to do business with them. There are so many human rights abuses going on in China that even the Chinese can't wait to get out of there. Right. And I don't blame Chinese people for what the CCP do and their policies, like I don't blame Jewish people for what the Israeli government do. And I would hope people around the world would not blame us for the absolute crap and devastation this Labour government is putting Australia through. That's not the way I see things. But, you know, why is the World Economic Forum, my God, you want us to respect you as an organization. We're not going to now because you've been behind so much evil. But why would the World Economic Forum, and they have their conferences and they want us all to think that they're the highfalutin best of the best? Why would you publicly acknowledge your admiration for a country with such vast human rights abuses while at the same time telling us that we're going to go to jail if we offend someone? I think the Uyghurs are pretty bloody offended.
It's staggering, isn't it, to think that if you wanted to look at slavery over history and then you look at it today, it would be slavery with social security attached to it, such as
we're debt slaves. We are debt slaves. But right now, until we get a digital ID, we can walk around freely.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so, yeah, look, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because if you look at the bare minimum of what you're being handed, and it is, if you're on some form of social security, there's not much to it. There is nothing. It's a little bit over enough to put a little bit of food in your mouth in a subsidised boarding facility, housing commission or something like that. Like there's nothing. It's
Well, they give
staggering.
these people almost food stamps like America and Australia. I think they've got cards where, it's programmed. You can only spend it in a food store. You can't sort of, if you're someone that's on Centrelink and you live at home with your parents, you can't save up the money and go out and buy a Chanel bag. That's what they don't want to happen. But I mean, that's no life for anyone. But, when push comes to shove, essentially people are, well, I thought we were reasonably free in Australia, but they're trying to take those freedoms away. When you're a slave and you are literally in chains and you're behind a wall and you are beaten and starved, not allowed a relationship, not allowed a sexual partner, not allowed to get married, not allowed to have children, not allowed to go on holiday, not allowed to start a business, not allowed to have a bank account, that's slavery. Right? And these people are guilty of it. Oh, well, we're just happy to do economic business with them and talk about what a wonderful economic superpower they are. No, they're not. They're human rights abusers.
When you consider that situation, that position, obviously fired up completely about it, and I know the audience is now. I guess it's a question, Nicola, for yourself and also for the audience. At what point do you look back and you reflect and you go, how do we completely turn this system on its head? What would we be able to do to find our way out of it? Do you look at it like that, or do you look at it from a perspective of this is nasty, what's the next nasty thing that I've got to avoid?
No, I think you're right. You're a good strategist, and you always talk about we must affect change from the inside, and that's what we're trying to do. That's why my husband is running for the Senate. That's why you've run for positions, and you probably should again, Jason. This is why we support the Australia First Alliance, and as many politicians who seem to be going in the right direction and seem to be saying the right things, we certainly can't put up with the status quo. I mean, I think Anthony Albanese has started referring to Alex Antic, who's one of my favourites to be one day PM of Australia, as far right. He's not far right. I've never met anyone who seems more centre, really, than Alex Antic, and that's probably why they don't like him, because they want him to be far left. They want him to be a ruthless capitalist, actually, the way they are. But we do have to, I guess we're trying to work within a corrupt system. Look, the reason I get fired up and the reason I get upset is that when you are a slave, you don't have the opportunity to do that. You don't even have the freedom that we have, the freedom of speech or the freedom to say, oh, I'll run for local council or I'll run for the Senate or I'll try and affect change from the inside, right? We're all in debt slavery. We all are. I mean, I saw that coming and I realized, we in the pandemic, we've got to get ourselves out of debt. Which is why I'm out there doing an ordinary job, because getting yourself out of debt is very expensive and, bye-bye savings. But all of these things that are difficult, being a debt slave, is something that we should be able to rectify, and that, you can go on debt strike. You can, by the way, all these very high energy bills that people are being forced to pay in Australia. Let me just say a very quick thing about that. You can approach your water company, your gas company, and your electricity company. And this was recommended to me by a man who runs a business in the mountains in the southeast of Melbourne. And you can offer them, you can say, all I can afford for my gas or my electricity or my water is $50 a week or $100 a month. And they put you on a payment plan, and that is all you will ever pay. So all these people that are paying these $1,200, $1,500 a month or quarter bills, you can negotiate and only pay what you can afford in perpetuity. And this is what a lot of people are doing. So if you're out there paying these huge bills, pick up the phone and do something about it. Because the way this is going, I don't care if Labour or Liberal getting, the way this is going, people in this country are going to go on debt strike and they're going to refuse to pay their debts. And it won't really matter. It won't really matter if they destroy your credit, because they're going to destroy your credit because of your Facebook posts or your X posts. Right. So all those years that you've paid your debts, and I'm not encouraging people to not pay their bills. I'm just saying that all the years people have checked on their credit score and tried to be a good debt slave, it's not going to matter much if you're actually going to be put into, the red bracket into the red because you said, oh, Labour are crap, I'm not voting for them. The game is changing. This isn't about just being a good debt slave anymore. This is about control of every aspect of your lives. And, this is Australia, right? It's pretty relaxed. I wouldn't be surprised if their dossier on these politicians, they've got them having conversations and, smoking pot on the back porch, or watching porn or whatever people do in their private lives, which is private. And I agree that we should all have a private life. Right. But there are things you can do. There are measures you can put in place. And by golly, you need to start doing them because they've put our backs against the wall and we can't have Australians unable to eat. Right. It's not fair. People work too hard and just make sure you do something about it.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? In the 21st century, in 2025, we're having a discussion about Australians being able to eat at the same time as the Prime Minister wants to flood the country with more and more immigrants. At the same time that we're hearing reports that the median house price in Sydney is nudging $2 million. I mean, official reporting says 1.65 million, which is just obscene. But to think that $2 million to buy a home in Sydney, I mean, it's beyond anything that people could even consider. And when you think that you've got to have a 20% deposit to get in, so you're borrowing $1.6 million at 6%, you now need to be earning $400,000 a year to be able to afford a mortgage, and so that just means that nobody can do it. So then you're wondering how it is that how does that equation work? If that would be the top 1% of the population, but you've got half the population.
That's what they want: landlords and tenants. Landlords and tenants. So there's no middle class. There's the upper classes, and then there's just the working classes, the slaves, essentially the debt slaves. That's what they want.
So we're reaching a point, whichever way you look at it, of revolution and counter-revolution, and the idea that we have a system where the government, and you're right, it could be the fact that the government is so bad that the people will demand their removal, and they'll go, well, there you go, we'll replace it with the artificial intelligence system, and that's the way that they've arrived at it. So we are in a race. And I'm a little bit buoyed by that particular post that suggests that Pam Bondi will be investigating the Soroses for their involvement in funding this whole Tesla vandalism approach.
Well, they delivered bricks to the side of the road for the BLM riots in 2019. They delivered piles of bricks on construction trucks so that they could be hurled through windows of businesses. How are these people already not in jail? And just because you're rich, I don't think should mean that you don't go to jail, that your best friend is Hillary Clinton and your kids are married to each other and you're these dynasties and you can literally get away with murder, right? It's got to stop. We either have laws that protect everyone, right, and we're all equal under the law, or we don't. And if we don't, and we're seeing that we don't, that needs to be known to us, because that is a massive game changer, right? That is a massive game changer. There are people walking around like Bill Gates with smiles on their faces, and they've harmed a lot of people, and they don't seem to be subject to the law or any law anywhere in any country at all. And it's got to stop. They've had their free for all. 31 million people are dead from their injections. It's time for it to be brought to an end.
Yep, indeed. Now, when we look ahead now at the tariffs, and particularly from an Australian standpoint, and it's the overreaction that just blows my mind. One day we're worried about the price of homes, like we talked about, and then the next day we're worried now about the people who own these homes, that their superannuation funds balances have shrunk due to a stock market slump as a result of said tariffs. So it's this double-sided argument that there's always an argument to be on both sides of the fence on any issue, so that you always get to be right and to hold the moral high ground. But when you consider if interest rates were to come down by a full % over the next few months, what a difference that would make to the average household. If you consider that if a mortgage is $600,000, let's say on average, 1% of that is $6,000. So that's $500 a month. There would be a reduction in the average home mortgage. And therefore, you would expect that it would slightly reflect in a reduction in rent, but more than likely it would be a pausing in the need to increase rents is something, because the market will always determine the price of rents. But it's those people with variable loans, etc., would get the first advantage. So the encouragement, therefore, is to be able to get out of the rental market if you could and get into the property market. People say, well, how do I do that without a deposit? Well, interestingly, Peter Dutton has created a policy where he's saying that you can access your superannuation account up to $50,000 to be able to put together a deposit to get into your first home. So that it provides a little bit of hope. And what that is, it's a counter to the Albanese government's idea where they were going to partner with 10,000 people a year to go 60-40 on a property, which would allow them to be able to get their borrowing capacity up. So that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, but if the government owns part of your property, you're going to be covered in smart meters. That's how that's going to go.
Oh, there's no question that that's just, you would never want to partner with the government on private property. That's just insanity. That's like reverse fascism. Now, another interesting policy that came out by the UAP back in 2022 election, which is the one I ran with them in, was the idea of decentralisation. So what they wanted to do was to move government departments into regional areas around the country, which there's some of that's around, but you start doing more and more of it so that you can start building hubs. And therefore, what you do is that you're able to move the population out into these regional centres where property is more affordable.
Well, they're stopping that. They want everyone in the cities, in their smart cities. It's called managed retreat. They want you out of the countryside.
So therefore, something that's counter to that is a positive simply by definition, but more importantly, it makes a whole lot of sense. So no one's saying that you have to move out to the middle of nowhere and live in a tin shack to be able
Warragul's
to afford.
nice. Warragul's nice if you live in Melbourne.
There's so many beautiful places that you can live in regional areas. Now, the two things that you got going for you is that one, these days with the access to Starlink internet, you can pretty much work anywhere. Now, people will have reasons why they don't like Starlink and whatever. Good luck, but equally, with the idea of small modular nuclear reactors, you can create power virtually anywhere, provided we understand how that works and safety issues and the rest of it. But it's a whole different thing. I'll actually reach out to Kevin Lockery on small nuclear modular reactors for the latest update. Kevin's a very, very intelligent human being who was also involved with UAP back in the day, and I used to listen to a lot of his interviews that he was doing, and I reached out to him recently. He said he'd love to come onto the show to discuss any and all issues. So that'll be an interesting one to provide more perspective, because at the end of this, all of us need to become educated, fully informed on the real facts, and so that if we are going to form some form of resistance and evolve from the 2025 election towards 28, we want to be on top of our game and we want to be able to come up with solutions. And the one thing we've learned from the Australia First Alliance, and particularly from the People First Party and Jared Rennick, is that he is focused 100% on solutions. So we are all good at identifying problems, but we need to be able to work out where the solutions are. And that's why I came up with that concept of the 51st state, because I think that ultimately that is a solution that we could use here in Australia that would just bypass so much stuff and give us a way to look forward. We don't have to do anything. Certainly don't have to do that, but it's a perspective that needs to be studied. It's why I like to say to people in the conservative movement, why aren't we talking about a republic? Why would we want to be part of a regime where the king is a globalist? But we have to be part of a monarchy. Like, if that doesn't define the term controlled opposition, I don't know what does.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? To be a monarch and a globalist, that is a contradiction. He's become a laughingstock contradiction. Now, I just want to reassure Australians who are worried about nuclear power. The British Isles is a reasonably small area. England is 32, I think, or 34. You could fit 34 Englands into Australia, not the UK, just England. Now, we've had nuclear power stations in the UK for decades, all of my life. That's half a century. So if you want to check them out and where they are and how they've worked in our small country, look up Sizewell nuclear power stations. Sizewell, as it sounds, Sizewell. Look up Sizewell nuclear power stations and you can have a look. And I just want to read out a Facebook post that was sent to me. It was public, so I can read it out, by a lady called Cindy Niles, Cindy with a C. She says, our economies have been in the deep red for decades. State bankruptcy isn't exactly a solid reason for the collapse in this fake-ass economy of fiat nominal money printed out of thin air. What's happening now is the end of the last torturous narrative of debt slavery and the beginning of a bleak sequel. For that book to close and for the new one to be opened, the people must actively participate by turning the page, so to speak. As imperative as it was for the behavioral engineers to get the majority to behave as though an asymptomatic deadly contagion could be contained with sanitizer, grotty muzzles, and closing coffee shops during their 1984 chapter, it's also critical we collaborate in bringing the real economy to a grinding halt by taking instruction from daily publications of financial mayhem. Any normal person will be cancelling non-essential expenses. The long-standing small and medium businesses will fold. The support local brigade won't be paying extra for Australian-made anything. Vacations and renovations will be cancelled. Expenditures will shrink to bare minimum. Employers will be trimming the fat of Ozempic emaciated holdings. Property will be sold to investors who build post-war housing, surveillance laboratories. The propagandists will keep beating the drum until we're all in tempo, lockstep. And then she said the MSN published behavioural instructions disguised as news. Very important where you get your news. So thank you for checking in with the Daily Australian, because you get news and opinion here. Jason, what would you like to say before we go?
Well, it feels like, given that we're hump day, we're right in the middle of the week, and there's an equal amount of hopeful news and hopeless news. I just want to reassure people that at the end of the day, there is more than us than there is them. And I know that it's the same old, but one must keep their chin up and their hopes high. And in the process of being vital and countering the stagnation and the inertia, rest assured that we will prevail. That is where I sit. I know it's full of hope, and I just refuse to be beaten up by a system. And at the same time, I scratch my head and wonder, how is my message of hope so unseen or unheard? And I go, that's because it gives me enough energy to get up tomorrow and not get donged on the head by a system that is trying to censor me. And it's amazing what happens. Like, we're going to be okay.
Yeah, we are going to be okay. And, you know, they've become a laughing stock, essentially. Imagine if the whole country didn't so much go on debt strike, but organise payment plans for $100 a month for all their energy bills. They can't say no to you. There are laws against it as a consumer trade laws. Imagine if all of Australia went on payment plans for their energy. I think their buttholes would be tightening quite firmly when they realise, oops, we've overcharged them too much for too long. Thank you so much for listening again to the Daily Australian Wednesday Hump Day, halfway to the weekend. To myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Mr. News himself, Jason Olbourne. We will do this all over again tomorrow.